I'm your host, Dr. Catherine Clinton, and I am just thrilled to be talking with Dr. Deanna Minich today. Dr. Minich has a very impressive resume. She has a master's of science, a PhD. She's a certified medicine practitioner. She is a nutrition scientist, an international lecturer, teacher, and author of over 20 years' experience in the field. Throughout the years, she's been active as a function medicine clinician, and she now has her own practice, Food and Spirit. She is the author of 6 consumer books, just absolutely prolific. I love her writing. And she has her academic background with a nutrition and a master in science, degree in human nutrition, and a doctorate in medical sciences. We are just absolutely honored to have Dr. Deanna with us today. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us today.
Well, I was looking forward to it. I woke up this morning thinking about how we're going to have this conversation. So, this is the kind of juicy stuff that I love to talk about.
It is. It's so juicy. We were talking before we started recording about what meaning quantum biology has brought to my life, that interconnection of all of these small pieces interconnected to bring forth that bigger action we see play out in life around us. So I just am so thrilled to be talking with you today because what you write about, what you teach about, is so important when it comes to understanding these intricate dances of frequency and color and nutrition and how the body works. So I'm just excited to dive in with you today.
I am too. So, where do we begin with this very expansive area? It's big and huge. It's kind of, in some ways, people always ask, how do you make this stuff practical? And I think that there are a number of ways we can talk about those.
I can't wait. Let's just hit at some fundamentals. So I know you talk a lot about color and how it impacts our biology. And that's getting right at that quantum level of how our biology works to impact our health. So can we start there? What do you notice? What have you noticed from your work and your research about how color influences our health?
Well, color is like the meeting ground between the body and the psyche. I do think that it has so many applications to health and healing. And whether it's through food, it's through our environment, it's using color as medicine, color as a healing tool. Color is connected to light. And when I think of energy, light, consciousness, the way that we really bring that down into our human sphere, I think is through the conduit of color. All of those different beautiful wavelengths, all of those different perceptions that we get from that rainbow band and even beyond. So I do think that, where my study has been is with food. I'm a nutrition scientist by training, and where I got really tuned in and turned on to color was during my graduate work, where I was looking into carotenoids. Carotenoids are plant-based pigments that are very colorful. So they tend to be red, like lycopene, orange, like the carotenes, like alpha carotene, beta carotene, and even yellow, like lutein and the xanthophylls. So when I was going through graduate school, I didn't realize what I was actually studying, that it was quantum biology, that we have plants as the photosynthetic harnessers of color for us, so that when we ingest those plant foods, that we are breaking apart those bonds of color for ATP, for energy through the mitochondria. And I know that you love really diving into all things mitochondria through your social media. So, yeah, I think that color serves as a vehicle for energy for us on many different levels.
I'm always blown away by what you have to say and share. And I couldn't agree more with you. That frequency of color powering our mitochondria is really getting at a whole new paradigm of health and what affects our health and how we can affect our health. And so I'm so glad you're talking about color as a frequency nutrient, right? That's absolutely amazing. So you started talking about these phytochemicals and phytonutrients that we find in our colored food, our naturally colored food, right? Not our pack of Skittles, but
Yes.
yes. Um, and how do you think that plays out? Our mitochondria are really what are making those hormones, right? Our sex hormones, our pregnenolone, all of those things are coming from that mitochondria. And you already alluded to the fact that those color frequencies are helping power that production of ATP through the mitochondria. So, can you take us a little stepwise through how these phytonutrients are impacting our hormones?
Wow. That's a big question. Well, let's start in the micro, and then we'll get into the macro of it. So, if we look at phytochemicals, what are they? They are plant-based compounds that typically are not giving us calories in the true traditional sense that protein, carbohydrate, and fat are doing that, right? So, like 4 calories per gram for carbohydrate, and we're not seeing that with phytonutrients. Phytonutrients are doing other things. They're what I would call functional signatures of plants. And they have different configurations. Some of them are long bonds of long carbon chains with multiple double bonds. So they're collecting and absorbing a lot of this light, this energy, carrying it through into our being. So, yes, when we ingest these compounds, what they're doing is they're acting in multiple ways. And I typically see them as acting in 3 ways within the cell. First and foremost, I see them happening within the realm of the whole cascade of insulin sensitivity, which is what you were just asking about as it relates to hormones. Many times we think of the sex steroids, but then there's the obvious insulin and cortisol, which are very much at the basic ground level of our survival. And so thinking about insulin sensitivity and response of that cell. So that's one area that they play in. The other one is stress response, the xenohormetic response of the environment. And then how do we transfer that adaptogenic response into the cell? How do we actually become more fitful and responsive and resilient in our environment? And I do think that plants are like that divining rod into helping our cellular physiology to respond better. And then the third way that plant compounds help us at the cellular level would be by helping us with inflammation. And we know about inflammation as the bedrock of so many different chronic diseases. If we can maintain a less inflammatory state, typically this bodes very well for us. And we can look at inflammation psychologically in terms of reactivity or impulsivity. And we can also look at it as a more physiological response in the way of redness, pain, heat, and swelling. So just at a very basic level, plants are helping us at the cell level with these 3 things: insulin response, cell stress resilience, cultivation, and just adapting to our environment better. And then the third one, inflammation. And then aside from all of that, there is this connection with so many other things like binding toxins in the gut, helping our gut microbiome. I mean, there's a plethora of different functions that these phytochemicals are engaged with.
It is absolutely fascinating, isn't it? And that interplay between color and phytonutrients and the gut microbiome, and then are all those 3 different sets of areas where they're impacting our biology. You can see that interplay between all those 3 is so interesting. Then when you add the light into it, I'm sorry, I just get so excited when you add the light into it, and the ability of those phytochemicals like flavins to capture light. I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing.
It is. It is. And I want to get back to what you said about hormones too, because I'm thinking what we could do is go through the psychoneuroendocrine circuit and we can talk about plants at every level.
Yeah.
So, when I think of the rainbow, I am thinking of essentially the endocrine circuit. And this is connected to also the chakra system from ancient traditions, right? But the chakras, as I see it, these places of heightened activity in the body that the ancients saw and felt and really had a perspective into, I do think are in Western terms, we're really looking at the endocrine circuit. So if we start with the adrenals, we'll start from bottom up. We'll start with red. And when I think of the adrenals, I think of the color red. I think of reactivity. I think of resilience. I think of aliveness, awareness. This is what is keeping us safe, stable, and sound in our everyday physical environment. This is where plants can come in, especially red colored plant-based foods. So I wrote and published an article in the Journal of Nutrition and Metabolism where I talk about these colors and how they sync up to our psychoneuroendocrine system. And red just happens to be a very protective compound. It syncs up with not just things like lycopene, but anthocyanins, a number of the different, like you were mentioning, the flavonoids. And they tend to modulate stress response. They tend to help our immune system, all of which we would see very much connected into the adrenals. So the adrenals would be overseeing cortisol, would be overseeing our inflammatory immune response. So when I think red, I do think stress, and I do think, okay, red plant-based foods, pomegranate, cherries, looking at apple skins, beets, anything that would be red in nature could be giving us some of these red colorful compounds that could be very protective and stress modulating.
That is absolutely beautiful. I love how you're going to go through these colors because you have something called the seven steps of healing, right? And
Yes,
it
this this color chart, which is actually what we'll walk through so that everybody can kind of get a gauge as to the physiology, psychology, and then foods that connect into the individual spectrum.
It's absolutely amazing. And I usually say this at the end, but I'm going to say it right now. You guys go check out Deanna's presenter page. She has links to so many free resources and so much information on her website. And through her, she's just an abundance, a wealth of information. So check out her presenter page and let's dive back into the colors. So we were
Okay.
just talking about red.
Yeah, so that is red, and this is where many times we hear about plants being adaptogenic or helping with our cellular stress response. I would connect that into the red, the adrenal system of health. But we're going to move through because stress response is not just about the adrenals. We need to go upstream, which we're going to get to. You're wearing orange. So orange is the color of, I see it as the color of the ovaries and the testes, the reproductive creative functions of our bodies. And so in one of my books, so you mentioned that I wrote 6 of them. There's one that I really go deeper into color, and it's called Whole Detox. And within that orange chapter, I talk about how there is a connection between hormones, our overall reproductive system, and some of these carotenoids, especially as we see in animal studies. For example, in studies with cows, when they are fed beta carotene or carotenoids, there's a connection with things like serum progesterone. It's not a causal connection, it's an association, but there is a connection, as it seems, between the fat soluble sex steroids and also the fat soluble carotenoids. They seem to lodge in the fatty parts of the body, which tend to be just they tend to be more creative. So that when I think of orange, I think of it's also a nice warming color. It's a creative color. And when we look in nature and the compounds it provides us, we can get a lot of these carotenoids that are orange to help protect those parts of the body. Like even if we talk about sperm for a second, there are a few studies looking at how taking in these antioxidant carotenoids can confer better survival for the sperm. So the head of the sperm is loaded with antioxidants so that it can survive, right? That allows it to be kind of the winner out of all of the different sperm, right? It is able to transmit its information in that way. So looking at sperm quality, also the ovary concentrates. There was one study that showed up to 14 different carotenoids. And we know that for the process of ovulation at the genetic level, that there is a connection to retinol, vitamin A, and the precursor of vitamin A is beta carotene, which tends to convert to some extent, not fully in everybody because there are different enzymes for that. So yes, I see orange as connected to carotenoids. I see it being connected to fertility, to reproductive health.
That's absolutely fascinating. I love how you're walking us through the systems and how you relate that with some of the ancient wisdom that, was a different set of scientific standards, which are real, observation and sitting in silence with the world around you and your body is an amazing piece of science that we've kind of walked away from. So I love how you're marrying the two. It's beautiful. So I'm excited to learn about yellow.
Yellow, here we go. Well, yellow is one of the most popular colors, believe it or not. There was a study that was published by researchers in Manchester, England, in which they surveyed people on their favorite color and then correlated that to mood state. And they found that, like, the sunshiny kind of yellow was one of the more popular colors, especially in people who had healthy mood. And so if we think of yellow, the color of the sun, we are run by the sun as human beings with the circadian rhythm, right? So the yellow is a color I correlate it to the digestive tract, to the fire element. And from an endocrine perspective, I would correlate it to the pancreas and also the liver. If we think of the bile, it's kind of this yellow green, greenish color, acid, rotting, ripening, this transformative property that's happening in the digestive tract, syncing that up with the elemental system of fire. So what helps us to burn better in the gut? Well, I think of yellow foods from the perspective of acids. So if I think of lemon as an example, a lot of those different whether it's acids or things that help us produce better acid or help us to produce better bile, like cholagogues, things like dandelion. Also, ginger is an excellent anti-inflammatory, but also helps with gastric motility. It helps to tonify the gut. So I think of that as part of yellow. I think of pineapple providing us with enzymes to better transform and break down different things that we are eating. I think of prebiotic fibers that are in squashes that can be yellow. So again, I just want to mention too that as we go through the colors, it's not like anything is clear cut. It's not like, nature has fuzzy boundaries rather than clear cut. I'm doing a very simple pattern recognition of color as it relates to functionality in the body that would fall in alignment with the endocrine system. So it's not to say that a red food would never help with its fiber to help with a prebiotic effect, right? But if we can remember that yellow correlates to gut, correlates to the fire element, to transformation, prebiotics, probiotics, looking at even polyphenols and acids and how important that is. It's just an easy way to bring it all together.
I think it's absolutely brilliant. I love what you're doing with color and simplifying it in a way, when we get in the weeds with what's happening in the biochemistry of the body, it gets kind of like, what are we talking about? But simplifying it down to these easy to recognize patterns is just brilliant.
Yeah, it's just something easy to anchor into.
Mm.
Now, if we move from yellow into green, we're moving up in the body to the heart. So green is the color of nature. Green is the color, it's been established more in the marketing sphere that it's a color of health and healing. So when we think of the color green, we might think of a tree, we might think of leaves. And if we translate that into the body, the way that I think about it is in relationship to the heart and the blood vessels, kind of like the vasculature that runs through us that helps to allow us to expand and oxygenate. So in my mind, the heart and the lungs are very much interconnected. It's like they're married. They work very much in tandem. through oxygen, right? So the air element, we take in a deep breath. It's not only filling the lungs, we're changing the vasculature. So everybody just take a nice deep breath. So how do foods translate into better respiration and better oxygenation and circulation in the body? Well, if we look at some of the green foods like green leafy vegetables, plant foods that have leaves, many of those plant-based foods that are green contain things like folates. They contain things like vitamin K1 or phylloquinone, which plays a role in clotting and coagulation, hence the K, the German K for coagulation. It also contains magnesium. I mean, a lot of these green foods contain these nutrients that would correlate to better vasculature, better vessel health, and better blood flow. Like one of the other ones I think about that not many people know about would be nitrates. So when I think of green foods like arugula or celery, chervil, beet greens, a lot of these are very rich in nitrates. And when we take in those green foods rich in nitrates, we convert them through a sequence of reactions into nitric oxide, which is a gas that opens up and creates vasodilation. So then we might sense that feeling of relaxation and openness. And we want an open heart, right? We don't want constriction, contraction, and closing of our vessels. So the heart is all about that sense of openness.
Oh, that's absolutely beautiful. I just read a study where they visualize neurons growing, and there was a dominant theory that it was this like a balloon where they inflate and deflate and do this thing. But now they've actually visualized, I wish I could cue in a video right now of it, these neurons branching just like tree branches, just like you're talking about, just that fractal pattern of branching out, and you can see it just clear in clear time. It's absolutely amazing and goes exactly with what you're talking about right now with green plants and that ability to reproduce and reap oxygen and do those redox reactions that drive life, right? It's
Yes. That's beautiful. It's so nice to have a visual like that because when we can visualize things that are happening in our body, I think we potentiate them. Where our energy goes is where, there's momentum, there's manifestation. So to focus on more of the like the positive, like the regenerative, just like you're saying, I just feel like that is so essential for really staying in touch with our inner milieu. And actually, it brings us up into the brain, which is, if I think of visualization, intellectualization, imagination, wisdom, intuition, and how do we nourish the wisdom within? And I do think that much of that comes into alignment with, and I'm just going to cluster them all together: pineal, hypothalamus, and pituitary, and really looking at this triad within the brain and how this circuitry, these small organs of endocrine origin, especially the pineal and that pituitary, of course, which are producing a number of hormones that are changing the downstream messages that, if we think of like, how do we change our thinking, our thoughts, our imagery so that we can go downstream and start to create the crosstalk, create the communication. So when I'm up in the brain reflecting on those three, and especially pituitary hypothalamus here, I think of blue purple foods. And the color that people seem to get too few of in the diet is blue purple. Things like blueberries and blackberries, huckleberries, eggplant, figs, raisins, purple variety of foods that normally are in different types of colors, like purple carrots, purple broccoli. You and I live in the Pacific Northwest, so we get to see things like purple cauliflower and purple Brussels sprouts. Sometimes people will ask me like, where did you find those? And purple in my mind is precious. It's regal. It's royal. It has it doesn't occur very often. So when we see it, to really take it in, because those purple pigments, what we see in the scientific literature is that they have a functional signature for the brain. And many of those compounds can embed into certain parts of the brain that correspond with learning and memory. And there are even studies looking at mood looking at mood and changing that. So, and I also put into this category not just blue and purple, but sometimes brown. When I think of brown and deep colored brown, so I'm talking like cocoa, raw cacao kind of brown. I'm thinking like, certain maca phenotype brown. I'm thinking of modulation of our hypothalamic pituitary in the way of mood and mind and mental health, and how powerful these different phytochemicals are for really changing up the brain chemistry, particularly through flavonoids and glucosinolates. There are these certain phytochemical compounds in things like maca, cocoa, even the berries, these polyphenols, and even, there are other classes of compounds as well. But just to make it simple, they seem to key into receptors that are modulating ultimately mood. So things like the GABA receptor. Some of these flavonoids are keying in and helping us to have less anxiety. So having a cup of tea, getting those flavonoids, making sure that we have berries, we can be doing so much to change our brain chemistry just through the science of colorful foods.
It's absolutely amazing. I'm so uh, just all these things are going in my head as you go through the colors. Just,
I know. I love when we get into the brain. There's so much to talk about there.
oh, there really is. And when you're talking about brown, I can't help think about, mushrooms and just
Oh,
their
yeah.
ability
That's
in the brown. Like you just it's absolutely mind-blowing when we look at color and phytochemicals in a new light, really that ability of frequency to act as a nutrient is just absolutely mind-blowing. I love it. Can you, before we let you go today, can you tell us a little bit about what are your favorite recommendations for getting these colors in and affecting our overall health on this quantum biological level with the frequency of color in our life?
That's a great question. I would say it has to come on two levels. One would be the internal level, and the other one is external. So when it comes to the internal, eating the rainbow, eating a variety, my three principles are color, creativity, and variety, and bringing those into our daily meals. And then I do think that externally, looking at the colors we wear, the colors that we surround ourselves with, making sure that we have access to full spectrum light, that we are having that early morning light, that we're refraining from light at night, that we're staying in healthy balance with that circadian rhythm. I didn't mention talking about even melatonin and other types of neurotransmitters and hormones that we find in plant-based foods, and how the gut is releasing a lot of that as well. And I do think that we can see through light, our exposure to light on a daily basis. So what I would say is examine what is your favorite color on a day by day basis. I'm very intentional about the colors that I even wear for certain kinds of just even changing my own psychology. And just even thinking of you today, I was thinking, I want to wear pink today. And we didn't cover pink in the spectrum. There aren't, I put pink oftentimes down into the red category, right? As a shade, because every color has its own spectrum. And we didn't even get into that, like the color orange you're wearing. There's a deep kind of a burnt orange. There is more of a pastel. Where are we vibing within that whole entire spectrum? Really follow, people say follow your heart. I say follow your color. What colors do you love? What colors are enriching and nourishing you? I do think that that's important from a food perspective, and also just from an external, what we're bathing our sensory retinal cues in. What are we taking in? Are we looking at blue light, red light, full spectrum light? What are we signaling to our brain through our retina? So the eyes are really essential in that perception of color. And really thinking about that, having a sense of beauty. I think, Catherine, that so many times people are overlooking that there's an art to healing. And when we think of private practice versus healing arts, how do we bring in the art, the beauty, the softness, the consciousness and the way of really connecting into the aspects of life that truly invigorate us. And I think that that's what color can do.
I couldn't agree more with you. I just love what you're saying. It gets to some of the fundamental pieces of our health that are being missed. And I love that you bring it down to these easy to recognize pieces for very intricate, sophisticated communication networks that are within our body, outside of our body. I know they've done research with the colors on the wall and how that impacts our hormone levels and our stress hormones and attention. It's just really a a shift in perspective of looking at color as a nutrient, right? As a fundamental piece of our biology.
Absolutely. And it's been said that even people who are colorblind can also experience color in other ways, that it's not limited to sight. Color is palpable, it's vibratory, it has frequency. Like there are other layers to our being that go beyond just sight. So what I would say here is that, one of the things that comes up is like, okay, but what about people who have red, green color blindness? Or what about people who are blind? Really tapping into color at different levels, a kinesthetic level. Sometimes what I like to do is just even to feel color, try to exercise my more subtle senses with things like color. Like if I'm wearing a certain color, how does that feel? And really taking that in multiple ways. So I wanted to mention that too, because I think that there are many different aspects of our being. We are a spectrum, and I think that we have limited ourselves to our five senses, to five flavors of food. We're starting to expand out now and see that we have receptors that go into bitter. We have receptors throughout the body that are tasting. So we're bigger and broader than we realize, in all good ways. And that's why I love that you're doing this summit, because when I saw that, that you have an interest, and I follow you on Instagram, so I see your posts, and I really do think we need to go to the next level. We need to really get beyond just being in the ditch of all things, biochemical, physiological. Many times our physiology is being run by what is more in the subtle aspects of our fields, the frequencies that we're surrounding ourselves with. So really making sure that we look at the quantum as the summit is focused on.
Oh, thank you for those words. I absolutely agree that we're missing this fundamental piece, and it's not a binary. So many times in this conversation we've had to say, it's not a binary, clearly defined box. It gets fuzzy, and it's not that our chemical nature doesn't exist, right? It's not that the macro pieces around me don't exist. It's that there's this infinite sea of quantum biology of these particles, of these frequencies that are informing us. And I love that you said that it isn't tied to sight, because our body has so many different light receptors and light harvesting complexes from opsins and our chloroforms and all of these different things, our chromoforms, excuse me, we're not plants, but all of these light harvesting
Yeah.
proteins in
Yeah.
us, sensing the color and sensing the light that don't go through our retina. So it isn't a tied to sight and binary black and white thing. It's a beautiful spectrum of frequency.
And I would even, I love everything that you do. I feel like you and I are sisters on this quantum path for sure. Like everything you're saying, I'm like, yes, 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 my neurons are lighting up. There's also the element of darkness. We focus a lot on light. Then there is this other aspect of darkness, which is what we need as well. We need the yin. We need to have darkness so that we can produce other compounds, right? Like melatonin. We can't produce melatonin unless we have darkness. So I know that you and I are focusing a lot on light, and within full spectrum light, we have all of the colors. And then there's the absence of light, which can also be medicinal in its own right. And I think like yin and yang, we need them both. One begets the other. Hence, we have the circadian rhythm, the diurnal rhythm, the seasonal rhythm. We have the planetary rhythms.
Mhm.
It's masculine, feminine. It's, like all of these different dynamic forces that are balancing and complementary and how they all come together. So what I have seen in nutrition is unfortunately there's this like polarization, right? Like on either side. But as you and I believe what we're both saying is that there's a lot of gradation in between, a
Mhm.
lot in how we think our body is what we need when you and I can go on this. I could tell like this is like our life's journey, our life's path. So hopefully we inspire somebody with all of this conversation because there's just so much fertile ground here. And I think this is where the whole area of medicine and healing are headed.
I couldn't agree more. And I got goosebumps when you talked about the darkness because it is so true. It is that duality, that polarity that we see driving life that we can apply to the light, to the darkness, to all of that. And it's such a beautiful dance of cycles and and recycling, transferring energy and frequency, and it's just absolutely incredible. So I know we could go on, and I'm kind of tempted to just see how far I can push it. But I know you are a very busy woman, and I appreciate your time coming on today and talking with us about all this amazing information. And what I find most exciting is that paradigm shift that happens where people start recognizing that frequency of the colors you're wearing and eating, the thoughts you're thinking, all of these things impact our health on a dramatic level. And I am just so grateful for your work in this area and getting people to connect the dots and see how interconnected this life we live really truly is. So thank you so much for joining us today.